Galactic news network tickers blared warnings of the void blight consuming star systems whole, but in Richard Carter's small hydroponics lab, the only immediate crisis was Fluffy. Fluffy? Or Specimen 734, as the adoption center had dismissively labeled the creature, was, by all accounts, spectacularly useless, a furry, photosynthesizing lump that mostly just sat. Richard often wondered if he'd adopted a very slow, very quiet, and utterly pointless pet rock, albeit one that occasionally shed shimmering, inert scales. The lab on Kepler's Respite hummed with the quiet efficiency of automated climate control, the air thick with the scent of rich soil, purified water, and the faint, metallic tang of nutrient solutions. Grow lamps cast a warm, amber glow over rows of terrestrial and xenobotanical specimens, a vibrant splash of life against the sterile, prefabricated walls of the outpost. Fluffy, however, contributed little to this vibrancy. It was a creature roughly the size of a common house cat, its form obscured by a dense, moss-like fur that shifted in color from a dull gray to a muted green depending on its proximity to the light. Its official designation, Specimen 734, still echoed in Richard's mind with the clipped, indifferent tone of the adoption center attendant who'd seemed relieved to see it go. The adoption had been swift, the paperwork minimal, the care instructions non-existent beyond a shrug and it seems to like light. Or not. Hard to tell. Richard sighed, carefully stepping around Fluffy, which had, over the course of the last 3 rotations, migrated a full 6 inches to obstruct a primary walkway between his tomato vines and the Venus flytrap hybrid. He often found himself talking to it, a low murmur against the backdrop of whirring fans and dripping irrigation. "Right then, old thing," he'd say. "Another thrilling day of?" "Well, of this, I suppose." His internal monologue was a constant stream of affectionate exasperation. It truly was like having a pet rock, one that required no feeding, no cleaning beyond the occasional dusting, and offered no companionship beyond its silent, enigmatic presence. The shimmering scales were its only peculiar out. They would appear sporadically beside Fluffy, each one a perfectly formed, iridescent disk, feather-light and cool to the touch, yet utterly unresponsive to any stimulus. Life on Kepler's Respite, a civilian research and trade outpost nestled in the relatively calm Orion Spur, maintained a facade of normalcy. GNN broadcasts about the distant void blight were, for many, just more background noise in the station's communal areas, like weather reports for a storm worlds away. Richard's daily routine was a testament to this practiced calm. He'd tend his plants, meticulously checking nutrient levels and pruning errant growth. Then, he'd attempt his Fluffy interaction ritual. He'd tried offering it various specially formulated nutrient pastes. Fluffy remained impassive. He'd dangled a small, polished chrome ball on a string, hoping for some flicker of predatory instinct or even mild curiosity. The ball swung, unheeded. He'd spoken to it in soft, encouraging tones, even tried playing different frequencies of music, all met with the same profound, unwavering non-responsiveness. Each failure only reinforced the galaxy's apparent consensus on creatures like Fluffy, and Richard's own patient, slightly bewildered commitment to its care. During a routine visit to procure some rare fungal spores, Dr. Eris Thorne, Kepler's Respite's resident xenobiologist, had paused by Fluffy's customary resting spot. Thorne, a tall, reedy man with an air of perpetual mild amusement at the universe's less sophisticated biological endeavors, peered at Fluffy through his optical enhancers. "Still got your, photosynthesizing decoration, Carter?" he'd remarked, a smile playing on his thin lips. "Charming in its own inert way. Some species just hit an evolutionary cul-de-sac, you know." Fascinating from a purely academic standpoint of what not to become. Richard had merely nodded, offering a tight smile of his own. Thorne's assessment, though delivered with a patronizing lightness, mirrored the official classification: biological dead end. Despite this, Richard continued to collect the shimmering scales. Each one was a tiny marvel of natural engineering, its surface swirling with iridescent patterns that seemed to shift and change in the light, like captured nebulae. He'd turn a newly shed scale over in his fingers, admiring its delicate structure, before running a small, handheld diagnostic scanner over it. The scanner always returned the same null reading. No energy output, no discernible complex compounds, just organic matter, beautifully arranged but utterly inert. He'd then add it to a clear nutrient paste jar on his workbench, where the collection was slowly, steadily growing. It was a peculiar habit, he knew, preserving the byproducts of a creature most would have composted. He remembered the adoption center on Cygnus Prime with a clarity that sometimes surprised him. It wasn't a place of warmth or hope, but a sterile processing facility for unwanted xenofauna. Specimen 734 had been alone in a small, transparent plasteel crate, the digital tag above it blinking a dull red. Status: unadoptable. No one else. Final disposition. No one else had even glanced its way. The attendant had been processing its euthanasia order when Richard, there to pick up a delivery of extremophile lichen, had simply said, "I'll take it." The decision hadn't been logical. It had been a quiet refusal to let something, anything, simply be erased because it served no obvious purpose. An act of compassion, perhaps, or just a human quirk of wanting to save the unwanted. The GNN updates, once ignorable, began to carry a new weight. "We have confirmation," a grim-faced Twi'lek anchor announced, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "The Xylos Prime system has fallen silent." Xylos Prime, known for its vibrant crystalline forests and its annual Festival of Lights, a system many on Kepler's respite had visited or had trade ties with. The screen behind the anchor showed a horrifying simulation. A creeping, amorphous darkness engulfing planets, stars winking out, leaving behind nothing but cold, empty void. The anchor's carefully neutral tone was fraying. A subsequent special report featured a renowned Cathar xenophysicist, her multifaceted eyes blinking rapidly as she explained the void blight. "It is not a large force," she stated, her antennae twitching with unease. "It does not win. It undoes. All energy, kinetic, thermal, bioelectric, even the strong and weak nuclear forces are systematically nullified, consumed. Matter itself appears to break down into constituent exotic particles, feeding the blight's expansion." Brief, sanitized combat footage flickered across the screen. Sleek, powerful warships of the Galactic Concordiate firing colossal energy beams that simply vanished a few kilometers from the blight's edge. Gigantic dreadnoughts, dripping with weaponry, went dark and silent, tumbling lifelessly as the blight washed over them. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were, it seemed, utterly powerless. One evening, as a particularly dire GNN bulletin detailed the blight's inexorable trajectory towards their own galactic quadrant, Richard was observing Fluffy. The report mentioned unusual gravitic distortions and subspace energy signatures detected in the blight's wake. For a fleeting, almost imperceptible moment, Richard thought he saw Fluffy shift. Not its usual slow drift, but a minute, almost convulsive tremor that ran through its furry body. Its orientation, usually towards the main grow lamp, seemed to subtly alter, as if aligning with something beyond the lab walls. He frowned, leaning closer. Had he imagined it? A minor station vibration, perhaps? He dismissed it with a shake of his head, attributing it to the oppressive news and his own fatigue. The next day, Commander Eva Rostova, head of security for Kepler's Respite, delivered a public address. Her image, calm and resolute, appeared on screens throughout the outpost. "Citizens of Kepler's Respite," she began, her voice even. "We are aware of the escalating threat posed by the entity designated Void Blight. While the danger is not immediate, prudence dictates we begin initial contingency planning. Resource audits are underway. We urge all residents to remain calm, to continue their essential duties, and to avoid the spread of unconfirmed reports or alarmist speculation." Her words were meant to reassure, but the very fact of the address underscored the rising tension that now thrummed beneath the outpost's daily life. Later that cycle, Richard found himself tidying his lab, the jar of shimmering scales in his hand. It was getting rather full. Perhaps it was time to dispose of them. They were, after all, just shed fur, essentially. He moved towards the waste reclamation chute, then hesitated. His gaze drifted from the intricate beauty of the scales, each a tiny, silent galaxy, to Fluffy, currently indistinguishable from a forgotten cushion in the corner. He couldn't articulate why, but he placed the jar back on its shelf. A flicker of something latent scientific curiosity, a peculiar sentimentality, an unacknowledged whisper of What if stayed his hand? He looked from the jar to his inert pet, then through his small viewport at the star-dusted canvas of the void beyond. A profound sense of unease, both personal and galactic, settled heavily in the quiet of his lab. Richard Carter remained preoccupied by the subtle shift he'd observed in Fluffy, the low vibration beneath his hand. Commander Rostova's public address, a calm, steady voice outlining necessary but insufficient preparations, faded into background noise in his small lab. His gaze was fixed on the furry lump nestled in her favorite patch of simulated sunlight, trying to reconcile the creature's usual inertness with that fleeting, unexpected resonance. He began to pay closer attention, not just to Fluffy, but to the ambient energy readings his lab equipment passively monitored. The vibration he'd felt seemed to coincide precisely with the moment the GNN report had discussed the Void Blight's unique energy-draining signature. Was it a coincidence? Or was his seemingly useless pet reacting to the distant, encroaching horror? GNN reports intensified in the following cycles. The holo display in the corner of the lab flickered with urgent updates, depicting the Void Blight's effects on systems closer to Kepler's respite. Communication blackouts swallowed star charts whole, once bright stellar icons winking out. Remote sensors detected sudden, impossible drops in temperature and energy levels across vast swathes of space. The report spoke of fleets vanishing, stations going dark, not destroyed, but simply nullified. Refugee ships, trailing the ghosts of systems lost, began arriving at Kepler's respite. They clogged the orbital lanes, their weary passengers spilling into the outpost's limited hab blocks and transit hub. Richard witnessed the growing panic firsthand during a necessary supply run, the hushed, fearful conversations, the lines for emergency transport that went nowhere, the palpable sense of a net tightening around their world. Back in the quiet of his lab, Richard noticed more distinct changes in Fluffy. A faint, internal luminescence, like captured starlight, became visible in dim light, pulsing softly beneath her fur. A low, rhythmic humming sound, barely audible, emanated from her body, a deep thrum that vibrated through the deck plating. And the shedding of the shimmering scales increased dramatically, small piles accumulating around her favorite spot, catching the light with an almost unnatural intensity. He retrieved his small collection of Fluffy's scales, stored in a repurposed sample container. Laying them out on his workbench, he began simple, amateur tests using basic lab equipment. He ran low-level energy scans, introduced various frequencies, trying to elicit any reaction, any sign that these inert flakes were more than biological detritus. Using an improvised setup involving a comms receiver tuned to ambient galactic frequencies, a repurposed energy sensor pointed directly at Fluffy, and another aimed at the scales, Richard detected a correlation. It was faint at first, easily dismissed as noise, but undeniable as he refined the sensor's focus. The scales, and seemingly Fluffy herself, emitted faint energy pulses. These pulses didn't just exist, they synchronized with fluctuations detected on the very edges of the approaching Blight's energy field. It was a mirror, a response, a connection he couldn't explain. Richard attempted to contact Dr. Eris Thorne, the outpost's resident xenobiologist, a respected figure known for his rigorous adherence to established scientific principles. He hoped his specific empirical observations about a biological entity reacting to the Blight's energy signature, however unconventional the entity, would be taken seriously by a fellow scientist. Dr. Thorne responded with a polite, firm decline. His voice, projected from the comm unit, was tired but quite professional. He attributed Richard's findings to sensor error. Amateur equipment wasn't shielded against ambient EM interference. The humming and glow, stress-induced pareidolia, a common psychological effect during galactic crises. The scales, biological waste, nothing more. He reiterated the scientific consensus on specimen 734's biological inertness, a species long studied and deemed utterly non-reactive. Richard felt the familiar sting of frustration, but it was quickly overshadowed by a fierce human stubbornness. Thorne's skepticism, while expected, didn't negate what he was observing. His focus shifted from convincing others to understanding the phenomenon he was witnessing in his own lab, a tiny anomaly against the backdrop of cosmic dread. Fluffy's humming became slightly louder, a resonant chord that seemed to fill the small lab. The scales on her body and in Richard's collection visibly pulsed with a faint, synchronized light, no longer just reflecting light, but generating it. The GNN Holo display, now a constant source of grim news, reported the void blight entering the wider sector containing Kepler's respite. The synchronization was undeniable now, a direct response to the encroaching nullity. Richard realized he must find a way to amplify or better understand the scales' reaction. They were the key, somehow, a physical manifestation of Fluffy's connection. He began modifying more equipment, cannibalizing old sensors and power conduits, perhaps attempting to create a larger collection point for the scales or focus their subtle energy. Commander Rostova's voice returned over the public address system, graver this time. She announced stricter resource rationing and mandatory evacuation protocols for non-essential personnel. It was the signal the Blight's imminent arrival at the system level was no longer a distant threat, but a terrifying certainty. Richard attempted to contact outpost authorities again, specifically Commander Rostova herself. He sent his data, his observations, his increasingly compelling, albeit still unconventional, findings about Fluffy's reaction and the scales. Rostova's aide, a harried-sounding voice amidst a cacophony of background noise, shouted orders, blaring alarms. Static received Richard's report. It was dismissed summarily. All personnel must focus on proven strategies, Mr. Carter. We are dealing with credible threats, not biological curiosities. Your report has been logged. We are initiating system defense protocol. Good luck. The connection cut. Richard understood. He was effectively on his own. The galaxy's response was failing. The authorities were overwhelmed, focused on conventional defenses that wouldn't work. His bond with Fluffy, his unique observations, his makeshift science, they were now his sole focus, his only hope amidst the collapsing galactic response. Then, the Void Blight entered the Kepler's respite system. Station-wide alarms blared, a piercing, insistent shriek that drowned out all other sound. External views on the lab's monitor showed the encroaching darkness, an impossible void swallowing the distant starfield. Energy grids fluctuated violently, lights flickering as defenses were activated, then overloaded. As the Blight's energy signature washed over the system, a wave of nullifying force, Fluffy's humming intensified dramatically. It was no longer a low thrum, but a resonant, almost musical tone that vibrated through Richard's very bones, a sound of immense power and ancient purpose. The shimmering scales surrounding her, and those collected by Richard, began to levitate, lifting into the air, swirling in a miniature vortex of light. Richard, witnessing Fluffy's powerful, undeniable reaction amidst the chaos and imminent destruction, the impossible sound filling the dying station, made a desperate decision. He didn't know how or why, but Fluffy was the key. He had to get her and the scales to a specific location, an environment where their reaction might be amplified or where he might finally understand. Richard grabbed Fluffy, gathering the swirling cloud of levitating scales into a container with his other arm. He raced towards the lab door, bursting out into the corridor. Alarms screamed, emergency lights pulsed red, and the sounds of panic and distant structural groans echoed around him. The Void Blight's leading edge was consuming the system's outer defenses, and Richard Carter, an ordinary human with an extraordinary pet, faced immediate peril from both the external horror and the collapsing world around him. The blaring klaxons were a physical blow, a relentless shriek that tore through the outpost. Emergency lights pulsed an angry, disorienting red, painting the corridors in strobing shadows. The deck beneath Richard's feet shuddered with distant impacts and the groan of stressed metal. Kepler's respite, usually a bustling hub of quiet efficiency, was a labyrinth of panic. Outside the reinforced viewports, the leading edge of the Void Blight was now visible, not a swarm of ships, but a creeping, inky blackness that consumed light itself. It rolled forward like an unnatural tide, extinguishing the distant stars one by one, swallowing the faint glow of the system's outer defenses as if they were never there. Energy readings spiked wildly on every terminal, then flatlined as systems collapsed under the Blight's nullifying touch. Cradled against Richard's chest, Rhea's soft, constant hum intensified. It was no longer just a gentle vibration, it was a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through his bones. On a nearby shelf, a small pile of the shimmering scales Rhea had shed over the cycles rattled violently. then lifted into the air, hovering erratically in response to the escalating sound and the encroaching blight energy. Navigating the corridors became a desperate obstacle course. An automated door was frozen shut, its control panel sparking uselessly. Richard scrambled over a section of collapsed ceiling conduit. Panicked crowds, a tide of terrified faces from a dozen species, surged past, ignoring the few security personnel trying to direct them towards failing evacuation points. Richard didn't follow. He knew the standard protocols were useless against this. His mind raced, pulling on his knowledge of the outpost's less-used service tunnels and maintenance access points. He ducked into a narrow passage, squeezing past emergency power conduits, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Human adaptability wasn't about brute force. It was about finding the path no one else saw, about jury-rigging solutions when the standard ones failed. Ria's internal luminescence brightened dramatically, a soft, ethereal violet glow that pushed back the harsh red emergency lights. It pulsed in time with her thrumming, and Richard saw that the light intensified when she was oriented towards the main viewports, towards the encroaching darkness outside. He held her up, turning slightly. Yes. The glow was strongest when she faced the blight. She wasn't just reacting, she was attuned. He needed a place with minimal interference, a place exposed, a place where whatever was happening to Rhea could interact directly with the incoming energy field. The primary observation dome. It was high, exposed, and offered a direct line of sight. Bursting from a maintenance hatch into a wider corridor, Richard collided with a small group of security personnel led by Commander Rostova. Her face was grim, streaked with sweat and dust, her sidearm drawn but held loosely, useless against the cosmic horror outside. "Carter! Where the hell do you think you're going?" "Get to the nearest shelter point now." "Commander! Wait!" Richard held Rhea out slightly, trying to keep his voice steady over the din. "It's Fluffy! Rhea! Look, she's reacting. The blight, it's doing something to her." He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a handful of the scales he'd collected. They pulsed with a faint, synchronized light in his palm, vibrating intensely. "These! They're not inert anymore. They're pulsing with energy, reacting to the blight." Rostova's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, fixed on the glowing creature and the pulsing scales. The sheer wrongness of it, the impossible energy coming from the creature everyone knew was a biological paperweight, cut through the panic for a moment. But then her training, the overwhelming reality of the collapsing station and the unstoppable threat outside, reasserted itself. "Anomalous energy fluctuation, Carter. The blight's doing weird things to everything. Get out of the corridor now!" She gestured impatiently with her arm, urging him towards a blast door. Richard saw the dismissal in her eyes, the ingrained adherence to protocol even as the universe dissolved around them. There was no time to argue, no time to convince. It was a split-second decision born of desperation and a stubborn, illogical faith. He ducked under her arm, ignoring her sharp command, and sprinted down the corridor towards the observation dome access, leaving the stunned security detail behind. As he ran, the shimmering scales he carried didn't just vibrate, they began to float, rising from his hand, swirling around Rhea like a miniature, glowing nebula. Scales stuck to his clothes lifted off, joining the growing cloud. They moved with a strange, deliberate pattern, drawn inexorably towards the creature in his arms. A sudden insight, sharp and clear, pierced through the fear. Not waste, never waste. He remembered a fragmented data entry he'd dismissed, a half-mythological account of Draconis' life cycle, talking about dormant components. The scales weren't inert byproducts. They were necessary. They were collectors. Reservoirs, building blocks. The accumulated scales, the ones he'd patiently gathered over cycles, represented stored potential, a vital matrix for whatever Rhea was becoming. He burst through the final access door, stumbling onto the observation platform. The view stole his breath, not with beauty, but with terror. The vast, empty blackness of the void blight filled half the sky, a tangible absence that devoured the light of distant nebulae. The system's final defense grids, massive energy barriers that should have held for hours, were flickering out like dying embers under its relentless pressure. Sections of the outpost visible from the dome's panoramic windows went dark, consumed. As the blight's leading edge made physical contact with the outpost's outer hull, the structure screamed. Alarms shrieked louder, lights died completely, plunging the dome into darkness save for the terrifying external view and Rhea's intensifying glow. Her resonant thrumming peaked, filling the dome with a vibrating energy that felt both immense and ancient. The shimmering scales, hundreds of them now, rushed towards Rhea in a torrent of light. They didn't just attach, they began to weave themselves into intricate glowing patterns around her small, lumpen body, coalescing into a complex, luminous structure that pulsed with power. Rhea, the useless pet, was activating. Richard stumbled forward, positioning Rhea in the center of the platform, exposed to the void. He braced himself, shielding her small form with his own body as the Blight's nullifying energy washed over their location, the cold, dead touch of cosmic oblivion pressing in. Fear was a physical thing, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, desperate hope. His pet rock, his fluffy lump, was the galaxy's last chance, based on the provided outline Part 4. The segment must follow all outline points sequentially, maintain continuity, deepen complexity, escalate emotional stakes, showcase HFY themes, and adhere to the specified style guidelines and constraints. Seamless continuation strategy. The previous content is not provided, but the outline begins with the Void Blight impacting Richard's location. I will start the narrative at the moment of impact, using sensory details to immediately plunge the reader into the chaos and physical effects of the Blight. This creates seamless continuity by picking up the action right at the threshold of the major event. Deepening complexity. The Blight's impact will be described not just as destruction, but as a specific nullification of energy and reality, adding a layer of scientific horror. Rhea's reaction will be complex, a resonant frequency that counteracts the nullification, hinting at a deeper, opposing force. The revelation of the Draconis as ancient guardians and Rhea as a seed adds cosmic history and recontextualizes Rhea's uselessness entirely. The scales becoming components adds a physical, tangible aspect to Rhea's power. Escalating emotional stakes. Richard's physical struggle against the Blight's effects makes the threat personal and immediate. His mental overload from the revelation adds psychological strain. The visual contrast between the Blight's darkness and Rhea's light energy creates a powerful emotional shift from despair to awe, hope. Richard's instinctive decision to help Rhea despite his state highlights his bond and courage. The visible purging of the Blight locally provides immediate emotional payoff. The final image of Rhea glowing while the wider galaxy is still in peril maintains tension for future segments, showcasing human exceptional qualities. Richard's resilience against the Blight's physical effects. His empathy and patience, implied by his earlier care for Rhea, now shown to be crucial for her activation. His observational skills, noticing Rhea's changes, now validated. His ingenuity and adaptability in improvising an energy conduit under extreme pressure. The core HFY moment, human compassion and simple care, dismissed by others, nurtured the key to saving the galaxy. Maintaining perfect pacing. The initial impact will be fast-paced, chaotic, and sensorially overwhelming. Rhea's transformation will be described with a mix of rapid visual changes and moments of focused intensity, scales integrating, core revealing. The revelation will be a sudden influx, jarring Richard and the reader. The struggle against the Blight's counterpush will increase tension again. Richard's improvisation will be quick, decisive action. The purging of the Blight and propagation of the wave will be a visually dramatic, slightly slower moment of awe. Richard's collapse provides a physical beat to punctuate the intensity. The final scene with Rostova and the wider galactic context provides a brief moment of reflection before ending with lingering uncertainty about the galactic realm's future. Execution of outline points. 1. Blight impact. Describe the physical sensation, the sound, the visual distortion as the energy front hits Kepler's respite. Focus on Richard's immediate experience. 2. Physical disorientation. Detail Richard's struggle blurring vision, nausea, difficulty breathing, the feeling of his own energy being leached away. 3. Rhea's intensified thrum. Describe the vibration originating from Rhea, a deep, resonant hum that feels like a counterforce, growing in intensity and becoming almost painful but also grounding. 4. Scales drawn in. Describe the shimmering scales around Rhea, or collected by Richard, suddenly becoming animated, levitating, and accelerating towards Rhea's form, glowing intensely. 5. Outer form cracks. Describe Rhea's previously inert, lumpy exterior cracking like drying mud or shedding like old skin, revealing brilliant light or a complex structure beneath. 6. Counter energy wave. Describe the visible energy wave emanating from Rhea's core, pushing back the encroaching darkness of the blight, creating a clear boundary. 7. Psychic impressions. Describe fragmented, non-linear images and sensations, flooding Richard's mind ancient stars, vast structures, alien forms, a sense of immense time and purpose. 8. Draconis seed revelation. Translate the impressions into a sudden, clear understanding. Rhea is a Draconis seed, designed to wait, gather energy via scales, and activate against threats. 9. Ancient Guardians. Explain the Draconis' purpose as ancient guardians who seeded the galaxy, their juvenile stage a misunderstood hibernation. 10. Richard's role realization. Richard connects his actions, his patience, his care, collecting the scales to Rhea's successful activation now. 11. Blight's violent reaction. Describe the Blight's energy field becoming turbulent, distorted, lashing out against Rhea's counter-frequency. 12. Richard's instinctive need. Show Richard, despite his pain and the mental flood, recognizing Rhea's struggle and the need for a stable connection. 13. Improvised conduit. Describe Richard grabbing a power cable, a piece of equipment, anything nearby, and connecting it to Rhea or near her. 14. Stability provided. Describe Rhea's energy output steadying and strengthening as a result of Richard's improvised anchor. 15. Localized purge. Describe the immediate area around Richard and Rhea becoming clear, bright, and stable, the blight visibly recoiling from this pocket. 16. Propagation. Describe the bubble of light and energy expanding outwards, pushing the blight back across the outpost, then the system. 17. Richard collapses. Describe Richard's physical and mental system shutting down from the overload and strain, falling to the ground but still conscious enough to see the result. 18. Witness stunned disbelief. Describe Rostova and others emerging, their expressions of shock and awe at the impossible sight. 19. Wider galactic context. A brief mention of distant blight reports, or comms chatter, indicating the fight continues elsewhere. 20. Rhea's serene state. End on a visual of Rhea's glowing core, floating calmly in the cleared space, her task begun, leaving the reader with a sense of hope, mixed with the vastness of the remaining threat. Confidence score. 5. 5. I am confident I can execute these points while meeting all requirements. Planning, content part 4. The world dissolved into a scream of tearing energy. Not sound, not light, but a raw, violating absence that clawed at Richard's senses. The Kepler's respite outpost shuddered around him, bulkheads groaning as power systems failed instantaneously, lights winking out across entire sectors. The air grew thin, cold, and tasted of metallic dust and something fundamentally wrong. He felt it in his bones, a sickening drain, like his very atoms were trying to unravel. His vision swam, the edges of reality blurring into the encroaching, suffocating darkness. A wave of profound nausea rolled over him, his thoughts scattering like startled birds. Maintaining consciousness was a fight, a desperate internal clawing against the void trying to consume him from the inside out. Every nerve ending screamed a protest the blight seemed determined to silence forever. But through the agony, through the nullification, a counterforce rose. Rhea. The low thrumming that had been his constant companion intensified, vibrating through the floor, through his boots, up his legs, into his very core. It was no longer just a sound. It was a physical presence, a deep, resonant hum that pushed back against the draining emptiness. It grew, becoming an almost painful pressure in his chest, a frequency that resonated with something ancient and powerful, directly opposing the blight's insidious touch within their immediate bubble. Around Rhea, the shimmering scales Richard had collected over the cycles, the ones scattered across the small lab, the ones clinging to her inert form, they came alive. Violent. They levitated, dozens, then hundreds, catching the faint emergency light that still flickered somewhere in the outpost's failing systems. They pulsed with an inner luminescence, a brilliant building energy, and then, with impossible speed, they were drawn inwards, accelerating towards Rhea's thrumming center like iron filings to a magnet. They slammed into her, not with impact but with absorption, integrating into her form in a blinding flash of pure white energy that forced Richard to shield his eyes even through his distorted vision. The inert, lumpy, outer form he had known as Fluffy couldn't contain the power. It cracked, fissures spreading across the dull, photosynthesizing hide like dry earth in a drought. The cracks widened, the outer shell peeling away in brittle, snapping segments, falling to the deck to reveal what lay beneath. A core of pure, pulsating energy, or perhaps crystalline light. It wasn't solid, not in any way Richard understood, but it was intensely real, radiating power that felt both ancient and utterly alien. This core actively pulsed, a beacon in the encroaching darkness, visibly absorbing the raw nullification energy of the blight that still raged outside their immediate vicinity. As the blight's pressure mounted, a palpable, physical weight pressing down on their fragile pocket of reality, Rhea's core pulsed brighter. She emitted a wave, not a simple pulse, but a focused, incredibly complex, multi-frequency energy signature that felt like intricate song and raw force combined. It hit the encroaching darkness, and the darkness recoiled, visibly. A distinct boundary formed, a shimmering, unstable barrier where Rhea's counter-frequency met the blight's null field, pushing it back from their immediate location in a defiance of cosmic law. And then, the impressions came, flooding his mind, bypassing his physical senses entirely. Fragmented images, raw data streams, sensations that weren't his own. Ancient beings of light and shadow dancing among nascent stars. Vast, living structures that spanned nebulae. The slow, patient turning of cosmic gears. A profound sense of purpose spanning epochs. The images coalesced, forming a sudden, undeniable understanding. Rhea, not Fluffy, a Draconis seed, bioengineered or perhaps simply evolved over unimaginable timescales, to hibernate, to wait, gathering cosmic energy slowly, patiently through the seemingly inert scales she shed, waiting for specific galactic threats, waiting for the void blight, waiting to awaken and counter it. The Draconis, ancient guardians, they hadn't vanished. They had transcended or sacrificed, seeding the galaxy with these dormant antibodies. Their useless juvenile stage, the millennia-long hibernation, wasn't a biological dead end. It was a necessary energy storage phase, a cosmic battery charging in plain sight, utterly misunderstood by younger, faster, more pragmatic races. And Richard, his act of patient care, his stubborn refusal to see her as useless, collecting the scales, providing a stable, nurturing environment. He hadn't just adopted a pet, he had unknowingly provided the perfect crucible, the necessary components, the catalyst for her timely and optimal activation at the precise moment the galaxy needed it most. His simple kindness had nurtured salvation. The blight didn't yield easily. Its energy field reacted violently to Rhea's counter-frequency. The darkness writhed, attempting to suppress her nascent power with overwhelming force. Localized, spatial distortions rippled through the cleared space, the air screaming as reality itself seemed to buckle. Energy feedback loops sparked and crackled, threatening to tear apart the fragile bubble Rhea had created. Despite the physical strain, the nausea, the blinding light, and the mental overload from the revelation, Richard's mind honed in on one thing. Rhea was struggling. Her output was immense, but unstable under the blight's counterpressure. She needed an anchor, a conduit, something to ground her, to stabilize her frequency against the chaotic pushback. His eyes, still blurry, scanned the wreckage around him. A severed power cable sparking erratically. A fallen sensor array, its casing cracked. His own multi-tool belt, components scattered. Instinct took over. He scrambled, ignoring the pain, grabbing the thickest power cable he could reach. With fumbling, desperate fingers, he jammed the sparking end into the nearest intact power conduit on the wall, then dragged the other end towards Rhea's glowing core. It wasn't designed for this, it shouldn't work. But he shoved the frayed wires towards the pulsating light, towards the edge of her energy field. It connected, not physically but energetically. A surge of feedback jolted up the cable, through Richard, but it didn't destroy. It grounded. The chaotic energy radiating from Rhea's core solidified. Her resonant thrumming became steady, powerful. The counter-frequency solidified. It expanded. The bubble of reality and energy within the Blight's null field didn't just hold, it grew, visibly. The darkness shrieked, a silent, cosmic scream of defeat as it was forced back. The localized area around Richard and Rhea was visibly purged. Light rushed back into the space, the oppressive cold vanished, replaced by a warm, vibrant energy. The air tasted clean, alive. It was a stark, impossible contrast to the surrounding chaos, a pocket of salvation carved out of the void. And then, the energy wave emanating from Rhea began to propagate outwards from Kepler's respite, a wave of pure, resonant light and frequency that swept across the immediate system, visibly pushing back the Blight's front. Stars that had begun to dim flickered back to full brilliance. Ships caught on the edge of the null field saw their systems stutter back to life. A chain reaction had begun. Richard collapsed, his body screaming in protest, his mind turning from the sheer scale of the power he had witnessed, the ancient secrets revealed. He fell to the deck, gasping, but his eyes remained fixed on the expanding wave of light, the first undeniable evidence of Rhea's success. From compromised shelters, from behind blast doors, Commander Rostova and the few surviving outpost personnel emerged. They stared, faces streaked with grime and tears, eyes wide with stunned disbelief, at the impossible pocket of safety, the glowing core of Rhea, the expanding wave of light pushing back the cosmic horror. While the local system was being cleared, faint subspace communications, reports from elsewhere in the galaxy, flickered through the restored channels. The void blight still raged, fleets were still falling, worlds were still being consumed. The galaxy was unaware of the turning tide, unaware that salvation had originated from this single, insignificant outpost, nurtured by a human who adopted a useless pet. Rhea floated serenely in the now safe space she had created, her crystalline core glowing with steady, immense power. She had completed her initial activation. Her galaxy-saving task had begun. The fate of 1,000 worlds hung in the balance, awaiting the propagation of her counter-energy, dependent on the quiet strength of a being once deemed useless and the simple kindness of the human who had cared for her. The blinding wave of energy from Rhea's core expanded, a silent, radiant bloom against the encroaching null field of the void blight. It didn't explode or burn. It resonated, a pure, complex counter-frequency amplified by the shimmering scales Richard had collected, channeled through the makeshift conduit he'd improvised. Propagating outwards from Kepler's respite, the wave followed the Blight's own insidious pathways through subspace, riding the very currents the darkness had used to spread. Across the galaxy, in systems bracing for annihilation or already choked by the Blight's oppressive void, an impossible reversal occurred. The creeping darkness recoiled. The energy-draining null fields flickered, then dissolved like mist in sunlight. Dead stars began to pulse with faint, returning light. Ships frozen in the void shuddered back to life as power flowed into inert conduits. The Blight wasn't just stopped. It was being unwound, purged from existence by an energy signature unlike anything ever recorded. On bridge after bridge, in command centers and research labs across 1 million worlds, system authorities, military leaders, and researchers viewed their monitors in stunned silence. Real-time sensor data painted an impossible picture. The void blight, the unstoppable cosmic horror, was retreating. And the source signature, the origin point of the cleansing wave, traced back unequivocally to the small, insignificant human outpost of Kepler's respite. Around the now stable platform where Rhea floated, Commander Rostova and the surviving outpost personnel gathered, faces streaked with grime and tears, eyes wide with profound shock, awe, and overwhelming relief. They watched the last tendrils of the local blight dissipate into nothingness. Then, comms channels that had been filled with screams and static erupted with disbelieving reports from Sector Command, from distant allies, from the Galactic Council itself. The blight was gone, everywhere. Richard Carter stirred, his body aching, his mind swimming, but a profound, quiet certainty settling within him. He pushed himself up, swaying slightly, and met Rostova's gaze. He was physically drained, the psychic resonance of Rhea's activation having coursed through their connection, but the vision, the knowledge imparted during that moment was crystalline. "The Draconis," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "They weren't extinct. They were waiting. The hatchlings, the useless ones, their seeds." Guardians. The revelation, delivered first by Richard, then rapidly corroborated by the energy patterns of Rhea's wave, and the faint, ancient data signatures embedded within it, swept across the galactic network like wildfire. The Draconas, an ancient species long thought mythical or extinct, had foreseen cyclical cosmic threats like the Void Blight. Unable to fight them conventionally, they had bioengineered their young to enter millennia-long dormant phases, accumulating vast amounts of ambient cosmic energy, becoming seeds scattered across the galaxy living antibodies designed to awaken and resonate with a counter-frequency when the darkness returned. Their useless juvenile state was not evolutionary failure, but patient, strategic hibernation. Galactic scientists, poring over the data from Kepler's respite, humbled and astonished, confirmed the details. Dr. Eris Thorne, his skepticism shattered, presented the findings himself. The Draconis seed required immense energy and specific environmental triggers to awaken fully. And the data was undeniable. Richard Carter's sustained, compassionate care, the stable environment of his home, and crucially, the collection and proximity of the shed scales, each a miniature energy capacitor, slowly charged over decades, had provided the optimal conditions and energy reserves needed for Rhea's timely and successful activation. An act of simple kindness had nurtured the galaxy's salvation. News of the useless pet and the human who adopted it, the quiet xenobiologist who saw value where an entire galaxy saw only inertness, spread like a legend. It became the story told in every mess hall, every market, every council chamber. It highlighted humanity's unexpected capacity for seeing beyond conventional utility, for forming bonds with creatures others discarded, and demonstrated that sometimes the most profound strength lay not in weapons or fleets, but in simple, stubborn compassion. Messages flooded into Kepler's respite. Holographic projections of alien representatives, some from species who had previously dismissed humanity as naive or insignificant, filled the outpost's comms hub. Their voices were filled with gratitude, astonishment, and a dawning respect. They spoke Richard Carter's name with reverence, acknowledging the human spirit that had nurtured the impossible. The galactic community began a fundamental, painful reassessment of its understanding of life, consciousness, and value. The Draconis legacy, and the undeniable proof that a creature deemed useless could hold the key to cosmic survival, shattered long-held assumptions. Species previously ignored or underestimated were viewed with new caution and curiosity. Humanity's status within the galactic community was irrevocably elevated. They were no longer just ambitious newcomers or formidable warriors. They were recognized for a unique quality, a capacity for empathy and connection that transcended species and conventional logic, a quality that had, quite literally, saved them all. Rhea, her immense energy expended in her singular galaxy-saving act, entered a new state. She was no longer the inert lump, nor the radiant guardian. Smaller now, perhaps, her form subtly altered, she floated calmly near Richard, radiating a faint, peaceful warmth. Their unique bond, forged in quiet care and cosmic crisis, remained, a living symbol of interspecies connection. Richard Carter, the quiet human who simply cared for a creature others discarded, found himself a reluctant hero. His simple act of kindness, his refusal to see uselessness where others did, had had cosmic consequences, echoing through the newly saved stars. The final scene was quiet. On a repaired balcony overlooking the vibrant, recovering landscape of Kepler's respite, Richard sat, a worn blanket draped over his shoulders. Rhea floated gently beside him, nudging his hand with her altered form. Together, they looked out at the vast, star-studded canvas of the galaxy, now free from the Void Blight. It was a quiet reflection on the immense power found not in grand gestures or overwhelming force, but in the simple, extraordinary act of caring for another. The galaxy had been saved, not by warships or superweapons, but by a human who adopted a useless pet.